Seeing as we supposedly did land someone on the moon, why didn't we keep going there?
But there's a contradiction between the argument that the Russians have made a fantastically beautiful rocket that's almost far in advance of anything that the Americans have created.
It wasn't far in advance of anything. It did its job perfectly.
Okay, but then why did they just stop?
They didn't just stop. They're still doing it to this day. They made rockets and they made technology that landed on Venus. They were the first ones to do that.
Fantastic. So how come they haven't sent a man to the moon?
Well, currently there's no reason to. They got beat to the moon. America did all the science. And there's been no reason to go back.
That's not about competition. It's about whoever got there first. Big deal. The point is that Trump recently announced that there's important minerals that need to be mined off the moon, and they want to send a manned mission back.
That's not why they're going back. They're going back to learn how to go to Mars.
Well, how about we learn how to go to the moon first?
We already know how to go to the moon. We've done it 6 times. And as of right now, no one has been able to put together a relatively good argument to say that they didn't.
I think that's the point we're trying to make, though, with this series of programs.
I have a question. It's concerning the navigation, if I may. Randy talked about the points of navigation on Apollo 13. You mention it in the book, and they used like a scope.
It was actually called sextant.
Sextant, that's right. So it's almost like a periscope, I gathered, where they could look through and they'd see the stars through it and line up the stars with their scale or something.
Yeah. So basically, what they modeled it after was celestial navigation that sailors have been using for hundreds of years, and they would use the stars in alignment with the Earth's horizon, and get a position fix and then plan their course. But it's important to note, that celestial navigation doesn't maintain course. It just gives you a position fix, and then you have to project where you're going from there. That's the method that the Apollo guidance computer used. The Apollo guidance computer required crude interface, so it required them looking through the optics, the sextant. So you'd have a telescope at 1 times magnification, and one I think was at 60 times magnification to get to 2 star sightings. And then they'll take readings from the star sightings and either the Earth's horizon and the moon's horizon, and then put those coordinates into the Apollo guidance computer, and then use that to align the inertial measuring unit, as well as get a position fix, and then project where you're going from there. That was their method of navigation.
Okay.
If anybody can see a problem with that, I don't know how else to explain it.
No, that's very good. So what I'm getting at is the Apollo 11 press conference when they returned from their mission. Sir Patrick Moore, British astronomer of late, asked the crew, could you see the stars from the surface of the moon? And there was a kind of slight pause and an embarrassment and things like that, and there was shuffling of feet and pens. And then Mike Collins, who was the navigator, says, I don't remember seeing any stars. And he wasn't even the guy that went down onto the moon. So my point is, if he said, I don't remember seeing any stars, and yet he was the guy supposedly looking through this sextant device at stars to get them there and back.
Yeah, can I speak to that? That's a very interesting point. And we have to also keep in mind that on the Gemini missions, I believe Mike Collins was talking about the abundance of stars that he was able to see while in low Earth orbit. And also keep in mind that for half of his orbit around the moon, he was on the dark side of the moon. So he would have seen the stars very clearly. If he didn't see them on the other side, he certainly would have saw them there. But as you pointed out, he wasn't on the lunar surface. You see, he was correcting Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong actually made a mistake. So he was trying to correct for him. And in the transcripts, I haven't got it here, but in the transcripts, that's actually reversed, which is very interesting point in and of itself. That's a matter for another time. But I just want to add a footnote to that, because a lot of people would say to me, well, Randy, there was no photos of the stars on the lunar surface because of the cameras. They weren't set for that. The aperture wasn't set for that reading. Now, I'm not an expert. Don't pretend to be when it comes to photographic evidence. But my argument is, okay, that makes sense to me, actually. I can accept that. Why not bring another camera? Now, they did, apparently, on Apollo 16. They brought the ultraviolet light camera that was supposed to have taken some star patterns from the lunar surface, but that was the only one. With all that technology, it could have easily brought another camera. But there's one more point I want to make. I'm just going by the official transcripts. So when Mike Collins was in orbit around the moon, while Neil and Buzz were allegedly walking on the moon, the service camera, and I think Scott has some photos of this, was taking continuous photos of the stars. And I can't find those photos anywhere. So I contacted NASA, and I was redirected to several other agencies, and none of them had those photos, which, again, find a little peculiar. I just want to get that out.
Marcus, you've this idea of light and photography. This is your speciality. Have you heard of these? The photographs were taken in orbit and things like that. Can you add anything to that?
There were certainly photographs taken in orbit, but most of them were taken on the lunar surface. And I think it's a very valid point to say that, yes, there were supposedly photographs taken from the command module the whole time that it was in orbit around the moon. But if the photographs don't exist or can't be found, could the answer be that the camera was retrieved doing a spacewalk on the return journey back to the Earth, assuming they were on the moon? They had to do a spacewalk to recover the camera. Now, we already established in other areas that photographic film does not survive in a vacuum, and we know that there will be a vacuum in space. Could it be that the camera was recovered, but the film was so badly damaged it showed nothing? I don't know. It's a red flag that the photographs that allegedly were taken by this command module camera don't appear to exist. And there are so many anomalies around the photographic evidence, which is basically what is put forward by many people as being definitive evidence for man setting foot on the lunar surface. There are so many problems with it.
Marcus, did you say that you've got some new evidence that's not been seen before?
It's going back to what we were discussing at the end of our last episode, which was from this book, For All Mankind. Now, this was the first book that I bought. It was published for the 20th anniversary in 1989. For All Mankind, it's taken from the plaque that Apollo 11 had, We Come in Peace for All Mankind, written by Harry Hurt III. And it's a pretty standard book in terms of what it recounts of the Apollo program, and it's pretty straightforward. It's amusingly written. Harry Hurt's a good author. But at the end of the book, right at the end, I'd just like to read a very, very short passage. It's what struck me at the time, and this is 1990, I bought the book. It's in the epilogue of his book. The Message of Apollo says, shortly after the Apollo 11 and 12 missions, NASA Public Affairs Officer Julian Scheer mischievously fueled the flames of doubt at the 10th annual meeting of a drinking fraternity known as the Man Will Never Fly Memorial Society. Scheer delighted some 200 admittedly inebriated members of the society by narrating a film of astronaut training exercises at a terrestrial moonscape in Michigan that bore an indistinguishable resemblance to the real lunar surface. The purpose of this film is to indicate that you can really fake things on the ground, to the point of deception, Scheer informed his audience, definitely inviting them to come to your own decision about whether or not man actually walked on the moon. Now, of course, that can be totally dismissed as being just a bit of humour, but why even bother to mention it? Why is it necessary? Julian Scheer, who was a PR man for NASA, he was quite a prominent person around at the time. He's with NASA for many years. Why would he bother to narrate a film deceptively informing the audience that this was on the lunar surface? It makes no sense. And it was probably that one paragraph which piqued my interest to the point where 29 years later, trying to find the answer to that question. Was it real or was it not? I'm still working on it. I mean, this is £50 worth of book. This is Norman Mailer's account of the Apollo 11 missions, Moonfire. It's a great book, huge book. And then there's the even bigger one by Andrew Chaikin, Man on the Moon, in 3 volumes. But God, that's quite a lot, yeah. How much information do you need? It's all there.
Neil, you were asking about the cameras on the CSM?
Yeah.
That's right.
There's the camera on the CSM, and this one shows where they're located on here.
Uh-huh.
This image here on the left-hand side is when they're so-called returning from the moon, and they're going to redock with the CSM. And this is the image that they shot. This is the claim shot. This is a complete error in simulation is what you're looking at here, because all of the lens covers, they're completely covered over. And this is after. None of the lens covers are off. They're all covered over here. That's the location of them. That's the very first thing you're going to see on them. Now, the other thing is, they only did one spacewalk. And there's a picture of the spacewalk of them picking up the panoramic camera magazine. Just one. Here's the official table for the panoramic camera, the mapping camera, and the photographic camera that was on the outside of the CSM. It's official that there was only one spacewalk to pick up the magazine. However, they had to go out 9 different times because there's 9 different magazines for the panoramic camera. They had 5 more for the mapping camera on the outside of this craft. There's only one recorded spacewalk when they picked it up. The other point being is these film cartridges had to be loaded at launch. They had to go through the atmosphere, the temperature ranges in the atmosphere on the outside of the vehicle, and they had to go through the Van Allen belts on the outside of the vehicle.
And was it pressurized?
Absolutely not.
Not pressurized, okay.
Nothing pressurized on the outside of that. For the full video, they only picked up one magazine and brought it back in.
And of course, one point to remember about the radiation is that we all talk about the Van Allen belts as if nothing happens beyond them. The point is that the space is full of radiation beyond the Van Allen belts.
Right. There's a different shot, and there's the actual camera shots of them. They're not pressurized. And the magazine that he picked up was that magazine cartridge right there from the stellar camera.
What were the photographs taken by those cameras? Have we seen?
I can't get a hold of any of those images.
Would some of them be of the lunar surface? I seem to recall seeing images of the lunar surface, supposedly taken by Mike Collins or whoever the astronaut was in the capsule at the time.
They were supposedly mapping the lunar surface at the same time taking photos of the stars from lunar orbit.
There's the frame numbers of the photographs that were taken from the outside. And I don't know how you can get the camera mounted vertically or whatever when it's supposed to be in barbecue mode. I don't know how you do that when you're orbiting. Okay. That's another little anomaly. Here are the photo numbers that are supposed to be taken from that mapping camera.
Right. And have you found any of them?
No. I've searched for these on the NASA site. I've Google searched it everywhere else. And from their other adjacent sites, I've looked at MIT, Harvard, and the University of Indiana.
There's a lot of them here. I mean, there's 2,000, was it 2,000 something? There's a lot of shots were taken.
Because they didn't even have the covers taken off of any of the equipment here.
Maybe that's why there's no pictures, because they forgot to take the covers off. You know, we've all done that in the past with old cameras.
And see this little mailbox here?
Yeah.
This thing launched a little tiny satellite out. That's where it was located. Now you have to realize that you could not get in the back side of this part of the sim. You're confined to the capsule only. So I don't know how any of that equipment worked in there. That's just some more unusual anomalies.
I was going to say, Scott, whilst you're here, you could maybe show Blue Earth Thing some of the stuff that you first showed us. What's your opinion of the wet flag?
It's a really bad argument. I don't see an issue with the wet flag. Now, I know I've seen it before, and I know I've seen the arguments against it. I can't really think of it right now because it's been a while. When I found the wet flag argument, that must have been early December. All I remember is that I saw an argument that demonstrated to me there's no problem there.
The only argument I've seen against the wet flag is it's a shadow.
Yeah, and I can't see it being a shadow. I looked at it carefully, and you can see the shadows, and then you can see the damp.
Does that look wet to you, Maddox?
Actually, what that looks like to me, it looks like dried water.
These images are supposed to be taken halfway to the moon in zero gravity.
Okay.
Why is it running?
And any moisture would immediately outgas.
I don't know.
There wouldn't be any residue left over.
I don't know. This is the first time I've seen these 3 images. So I don't know any history behind them, and I'm taking y'all's words for everything that's said about it. I'd have to do my own research on it.
I would suggest is that anything you can't answer or you're not sure about, you can certainly go back with what we're giving you and come back another time and say, yeah, I found an answer, you know.
Here's the outside of the window with the rain guard on it that's broken. Duct tape on. Why would that be on a spacecraft? Why would a rain guard be on the spacecraft?
It's got duct tape all over it.
I don't know the context of that image.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, and my question would be, why would those pictures be taken in the first place if it so obviously debunks the moon landing?
Yeah, there's several possibilities here, Blue. One of them is that it was simply an accident, and the other is that there were certain people who were taking these photographs who were actually secretly trying to get the word out. I know Mary Bennett and David Percy have talked about this, the whistleblowers.
Okay.
How about this photograph just for fun? I'm just pulling them up just random here for fun.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be the Earth, right there.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay? Well, if you're on the moon, that should be the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
You see the direction the sunlight is hitting the Earth at?
Okay.
Why is this lit up down here? They're not even above the terminator line. This should be a complete darkness.
Well, obviously the LM is much darker than the Earth. You could tell that because the Earth is extremely bright and the LM is still dark.
They're in total darkness. The sun hasn't come up on the surface of the moon here yet. Here's the antenna pointing straight down. So
Yeah,
they
but
can't possibly be communicating with the Earth because this is not lined up with it at all. It's just pointing down.
When were they on the moon in complete darkness?
That's why the book was called Dark Moon.
If you look at the angle that the sun is hitting the Earth at, the moon would not be lit up. Just look at the angle that the sun is hitting the Earth at.
You know the camera's tilted, right?
Well, he's pointing it straight up, which is a very difficult thing to do when it's trapped on your chest.
Yeah. So why is this lit up under here? How come this can
It's light
communicate when this thing's pointing at the ground?
Light bounces. And a lot of light bounces off the surface of the moon.
It's be important, I think, to work out what mission this was when this photo was taken, and it may possible there's an anomaly with the phase of the Earth and the lighting effects.
I don't see why you would think that this picture was taken while the moon was dark.
Now, Marcus, you said something out of the book being called Dark Moon. That's Bennett and Percy's book. Could you explain a bit more about that, please?
Okay, it was called Dark Moon because looking at Apollo 13, if it had landed when it was supposed to land and it hadn't had the oxygen tank explosion and had to return to Earth, if it had landed when it was scheduled to land, it would have landed in darkness. And that can be calculated using Celestron or any of the other lunar programs to show where on the moon at any given time, on a given date, the terminator will be, if that's what you want to find. And it was several miles beyond the terminator, so it would have been in darkness, which makes no sense at all, because it would be very hard to land in darkness on the moon on only the third mission. This is Apollo 13. There are so many other anomalies with Apollo 13 that one has to question whether it actually got off low Earth orbit in the first place. Because what was a capsule doing being recovered by the Soviet Navy from the Bay of Biscay the day after Apollo 13 launched? Which does seem a bit strange because it wasn't supposed to go anywhere near the Bay of Biscay, any launch. But if the Russian Navy were on an exercise, they were expecting something to happen. They knew when the launch was going to take place, April the 11th. On April the 12th, the Russian Navy recovered an Apollo command module from the Bay of Biscay. They put it onto one of their ships, took it back to Murmansk, and handed it back to the Americans 6 months later. It's now on display at Grand Rapids in Michigan, but it's sealed until 2076. So there is a serious anomaly here. That recovery of the command module was reported in the Russian press. It was reported in Stars and Stripes, the American military magazine, but that was all. Until somebody started looking into the events that took place, and they were very, very strange and weird events. And what the hell was an Apollo command module doing it floating around in the Atlantic off the coast of France?
Is there an official story in this Russian newspaper that says where this capsule came from?
Well, the implication being that they were expecting it to land, and they were there to pick it up. Now, whether they did pick it up, or whether the Americans got there first, whether the American submarine got there first to take off the astronauts who were on board, because they appeared in the Pacific a few days later, having come down on their parachute. So, as far as the Russians were concerned, they had recovered an American command module. an Apollo command module. But that wasn't reported in America. It was only reported about 30 years later when the story came out. There's a major article about it on the Owlis website.
It's interesting that the actual command module, which is the only part of the entire Saturn V rocket that actually returns to Earth. I know some of them have been accounted for. I know the Apollo 1 capsule is locked up somewhere and no one can look at it. Does anyone know about that?
The Odyssey of the Lost Apollo Command Module. A lengthy article, but it covers it in considerable detail.
Yeah, I said I found an article on the same thing too on some site called Astroautics.
Yes. Yeah, there it is.
I found a little picture.
That's the command module that was recovered by the Soviet Navy.
All right.
Now, some people have said that that is a boilerplate capsule. But the question still remains, what the hell was it doing in the Bay of Biscay? Because it was never reported missing. It's been loaded onto the US Coast Guard cutter, the South Wind, and it was returned to America.
Since it was repatriated and the Russians gave it back, does anyone know what happened to it?
Yes, it's on display at Grand Rapids Museum in Michigan.
But it's not on display as the Apollo 13 command module.
No, it's not. I see there's a picture of it here on display. No, it's not labelled as the Apollo 13 command module. I would say I don't know where the Apollo 13 command module actually is.
The Apollo 13 command module, that's in Kansas.
That's the one that was recovered by the Soviet Navy. It's called BP Boilerplate 1227.
Yeah, that one right there, the little white triangle right there.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's been sealed, so nobody can look inside it, at the Van Andel Museum Center, Grand Rapids, Michigan.
I just wanted to ask what was actually meant by boilerplate.
It's a non-functioning command module. It was used for practice. Astronauts would get on board and it would drop it into the sea and they would practice getting out of it.
Okay, right. And the other one, what Blue was just saying, is in Kansas, you said? That's the actual command module for Apollo 13.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Here's the article on the same event from the Russian perspective. So you've got two stories here. This is what the Russians say about it. Same pictures, so we're talking about the same thing. And there's the Soviets. Now, that's the South Wind crew with the Apollo command module in the background returning from Murmansk. So it's a weird story, this one. It's a very, very weird story. There are all sorts of pictures, all sorts of accounts of ships appearing at strange times as if they were preparing to be there for this rendezvous. And the people who crewed these ships are also quite mysterious. This is the Russian submarine. It's a K-8 submarine. So obviously you can't tell where it is specifically.
I mean, I was about to ask if this had just been one that was lost and then just floated around until someone found it. But obviously the chances, if something that size is lost in the middle of an ocean, the chances of anyone finding it are pretty slim. Did it have a beacon?
Just a possibility. A tracking beacon that maybe the Russians have picked up.
It's possible, but then you do have to ask, how come it managed to drift across from Florida, presumably that's where they were using them, or somewhere off the east coast of America, to drift about 2,000 miles across the Atlantic without somebody reporting it missing?
I wonder if it's like an American version of that. They let loose a capsule with all sorts of weird technology that doesn't really exist, just to throw the Russians off course a little bit.
It could be. There's certainly some reports of it. Just to go back on this map, there's Florida. That's where the Apollo, in this case Apollo 13, was launched from. There's the Bay of Biscay. So it's a bit off course because here is what is known as the Eye of Africa. It's a geological formation about 20 miles across, which is visible from space. It's known as the Eye of Africa because it looks rather like an eye, 3 circular concentric circles. As astronauts were launched out of Florida, they would fly across here over Africa, and they would watch out for the Eye of Africa so they knew they were roughly on course and got to the right continent. But of course this rather puts a kibosh on the idea that they avoided the Van Allen belts by launching to the North Pole, because you can't change direction in a spacecraft. Once you've launched it, you've got to go where it's going. You can't just go into a polar orbit. So, sorry NASA, you got that one a bit wrong. They didn't go over the poles to avoid the Van Allen belts. They went straight through them.